And here's where we really want to spend the bulk of our time today. As I'm sure you're aware, this webinar will be available as a recording. Certainly you can review those resources that we alluded to previously. Be more than happy to take questions at the end, as well as by email, to dig more deeply into that. But as I said, most importantly, once you have the means to communicate, in other words, how do you find these people and how do you contact them? The question then becomes, how do I use email and voice to message them? So we call what we do here at High Impact Prospecting a methodology. Methodology, for most of us, is a great touchstone of a word. At the end of the day, what it really means is the proven process. And I think that's part of the reasons that MBO was kind enough to invite us to speak today, because this is, in fact, very much a proven process. We've worked with clients who have reported to us over 6,000 meetings secured by means of using this process. So as you look at the bulleted layout here, you'll see basically 5 areas. First, of course, are the 2 tactics that we're talking about, tactics which are email and voice, and which are used in an integrated fashion. And we'll talk about that as we get a little further into the rhythm of how you communicate with them. Most importantly about email is personalizing it. And personalizing, what I mean by that is twofold. One, the obvious that you would expect, of course, which is using the individual's first name if it's appropriate, or referring to them in a more formal fashion if that is the expectation in that industry of how a consultant should reach out to them. But just as importantly is doing your homework. And I know I don't have to say that to anyone on this call, but that email should not be the same email that you sent to 100 other people, not when you're in professional services. As I said, integrating this with voice prospecting really helps you get to the best overall outcomes. I can't think of a better word than cement. And what email and voice do in tandem, they can refer logically to each other, create sort of a dialogue, whether or not you're actually getting responses early on, such that when you reach the point where a prospect has in fact responded to you, you have a great chain of communications that are meaningful and are going to be much more enabling of that first conversation for you. Appeal. Now in this case, what I mean by appeal is a peer level approach. I talked about doing your homework. Absolutely, that's important. But so many folks, when they approach an organization, particularly when they're in professional services, I think don't communicate as a peer. They communicate more as a supplicant. And at the end of the day, if in fact you are very confident in your skills and you have the value of your offering that you know matches the overall needs in this industry, you should be emphatic. You should, without beating your chest, treat yourself and treat the prospect as an equal. And lastly, follow-up. And follow-up essentially involves 2 things. One is persistence, which is basically a psychological trait that you have to either have or you have to develop and practice. And the other part of it is to do so in a manner that's not obnoxious or obtrusive and yet still keeps you engaged with this prospect. So let's talk a little bit about why this works. I know I've mentioned a couple of things, but at the end of the day, contacting prospects enough times helps to increase your opportunity to connect with them by as much as 100%. And there's an entire body of information out there that you can source via the web that supports this. In fact, most professional sales prospecting thought leaders believe that it can take as many as 8 to 10 times touching a prospect before you can actually have an opportunity to engage them in a conversation. Now, you certainly don't want those all to be voicemails. You certainly don't want them all to be emails, nor do you want to make them, frankly, fear your call by trying to reach them each and every day. But converging the two together in the right context, with the right rhythm, will help you eventually engage them in a much more effective fashion than perhaps you have done before. This longer period of time, basically using multiple channels, accomplishes two things. One is it enables you to touch 8 to 10 times without exhausting one particular channel or another, and it enables you to take advantage of the opportunities that each channel gives you, and we'll talk about that in a few more minutes. At the end of the day, though, regardless of which channel you're communicating about, it goes without saying, you have to tell them what you want to discuss, and you have to do it in a meaningful fashion. Persistent engagement is all about the number and manner of touch points. And again, as I said, 8 to 10. In this particular case, we're going to look at 6. And at the end of the day, when we talk about increasing your potential outcomes by 100%, I think that may, in fact, be somewhat conservative when it's executed well. So let's take a look at the touch point process. What you see here, as I said, are 6 touch points, essentially for brevity's sake, and it shows you something interesting right here at the outset. Basically what we're talking about is communication that in any one channel is no more frequently than every 3 business days. The other thing that you'll see, thanks to the icons here, is that we'll communicate with them by email the first couple of times. Now, why is that? Well, first, there's always what we call low-hanging fruit, right? There are the people that self-identify with pain points, are already looking for a solution to their challenges, and they're going to respond. But as importantly, and because so many of your prospects, maybe half of them, are going to come by engaging them via voice, email is also a great way to educate them. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Once you get into the process of integrating email and voice, as you see here, you can touch a prospect safely without annoying or upsetting them. And of course, it's all about the law of numbers. You touch enough people, sooner or later someone's going to say, leave me alone, and we have to respect that. But as I said, we have proven this process over a long period of time, essentially enabling us to reach out to someone in a meaningful fashion, looking for effective outcomes, touching them as many as 6 times in as short a time frame as 3 weeks. So we've looked at the overall process. We've talked about it from the standpoint of overall content, right? So how do we want to appeal to them? How do we want to follow up and so on? Let's delve in to what that first touch point, that email touch point, looks like. Now, as I said, we want to make sure that we are communicating with a prospect as a peer. And that is going to imply a couple of things. One is that you have the professional expertise and the confidence in yourself to communicate in such a fashion, but at the same time, a respectful tone. An executive summary is really the way we like to go because it essentially can condense your value proposition you're offering into a series of key points, which enables you to tell a story, but at the same time, keep it brief. Without a doubt, an email subject lines are very important. They need to be thoughtful. They need to be meaningful. They can't be deceptive. They can't be inspecific. And there are things, too, with respect to the use of email that you have to think about as well to keep you from actually falling into the spam filter of some organization. We can talk about that more, and happy to answer some questions about that in the Q&A. Always open and close politely. That's part of the respectful tone. So whether you are talking to them as a peer or not, opening with a thank you for their time and thanking them for taking the time to read it is important. Again, as I said, a presumptive statement, right? A statement about what you do and why what you do could be crucially important to them and is at the same time differentiating you from everyone else in your space. We mentioned Autotask here. You're probably all wondering if that's a typo. No, it's not. It's actually a company that we have done some work with before, and we have live examples here, thankfully with their blessing, that we can share with you as well. A couple other quick things here. Mention of companies in the space that you might have worked with. Now, I call this optional because not everyone's the same. Some companies are very attuned to the type of work you've done in the space, and the fact that you mention others and that is meaningful to them. Others, however, may have a business where things are held closely to the vest, and they don't want to, frankly, see reference to potential competitors in your list. So use that. It can be very effective, but do so based upon your own intuition and your own experience in your industry. And last is the call to action. That goes without saying. That's Sales 101. And so many of us are exceptional in what we do in terms of our expertise, in terms of our consultancy, but many of us, frankly, don't know that much about selling. At the end of the day, most of us also, I think, are very effective once we get in front of the right person to talk with them about what it is we do. But the question is, how do you get that door open? So that first email is very important to communicate that. At the end of it, however, there's got to be a call to action, whatever that is. Do you have time to speak? May I send you more information? There are a variety of ways to go.